This is J. Krishnamurti's second public talk in New Delhi, 1967.
If we may, we will continue with what we were talking about the other day when we met here. But before we go into it, I think it's important that we should understand what we mean by communication. In communication, it seems to me, there is not only a sense of communion, that is, an intimacy of exchange, of feeling, of ideas, of exposing oneself totally. But also, we have to use words. And as the speaker uses English, and if you also understand the meaning of the words in English, then it is fairly simple. But most of us, when we hear a particular word or a particular phrase or a particular expression, we are apt to translate it into our own language. And as most of the languages in India are loaded with words of Sanskrit, they have their own particular meaning. So when you hear a certain word or a certain idea, a phrase, you are apt to translate it into your own particular expression of language, into your own terminology. And thereby, we think we understand, but actually you don't. What takes place is when you translate what you hear into your particular language is that you go back to the pattern of your conditioned thinking. Like the other day when we discussed about awareness, naturally you will translate it into your language, into a certain Sanskrit word, which by using it, you think you have understood it. But actually what has taken place is you have fallen back into the groove, into the pattern which the mind is used to. But whereas if you didn't do that, but actually try to understand the meaning of that word in English itself, then you have to struggle to understand. So communication becomes extremely difficult when you are translating what you hear into your own particular language and thereby think that you understood it. But you have not. You have merely gone back to the old pattern of your thinking, which is traditional. So if we could abstain that, stop from translating it, but actually listen to the English word itself. Unfortunately, the speaker doesn't know any Indian language. So he has to speak in English, though it's rather unpopular at the present time. He has to speak in English. Therefore, if you will kindly not translate what you hear into your own language, then our communication will be much easier. And in communication, as I've always said, there is also communion. That is when the two minds meet at the same time, at the same level, with the same intensity. That is, at meeting the mind, your mind and the speaker's mind with an intensity, with a passion which is intense, and at the same time, then there is a possibility of communion. You know, when you love, there is a communion. When the people love, when you love somebody, without word, without a gesture, there is a communication, a communion taking place. And that's much more significant than intellectual understanding. Intellectual understanding is really not understanding at all. Here, a series of words, and we think we understand those words and the content of those words, and we seem to think we understand intellectually the idea. But actually what takes place, what you hear is unrelated to daily action, to a total living. And it's possible, communion is only possible when there is a direct relationship. And communication then becomes much more interesting, much more vital, more significant, meaningful. As we were saying the other day, we are concerned with actual living, not with ideas or ideologies. Because we live in a world that's greatly in confusion. There is misery, a great deal of violence, despair, anxiety, a sense of hopeless loneliness. And without fundamentally bringing about a revolution in the actual quality of the mind, mere ideas, ideologies have very little meaning. Ideas, which are an organized thought, and ideologies, what should be an ideational, conceptual thinking, has no validity at all, because we have to deal with actual daily living. Our actual daily psychological living is so confused, so miserable, shoddy. We, in our daily life, it's like living in a battlefield. Not only there is a conflict within, deeply, but also outwardly. Until we resolve this conflict totally, any pretension or ideational thinking becomes hypocritical. It's like the politicians, not only in this country but everywhere, that evoke God. You know there is some shady work going on. And so what we are concerned is bringing about, if possible, and it is possible, a total revolution, a psychological revolution, psychological mutation in the very core of our being. And that is, I feel, the crisis in our life. A crisis in consciousness, not economic, social, or political crisis. It's a crisis in ourselves as human beings. And without understanding, resolving that crisis, merely to bring about economic amelioration, social improvement, all that has very, very little meaning. So our question is whether it is possible as human beings to bring about, not intellectually but actually, a complete mutation, a complete revolution in the way of our thinking, living, feeling. You know, there is a difference between individuality and humanity, as a human being and as an individual. We are human beings, primarily, not individuals at all. Human beings, whether they live in America, Russia, or Europe, or here, they have their problems. They are miserable, unhappy, lonely, anxious, fearful, which is common to man, violent, in deep despair, trying to escape from this utter meaninglessness of life. They either go to churches, temples, or read books, take to drink, drugs, and all the various forms of escapes. We are human beings, and individuality is only a local entity. The local person, that is, he's a Hindu, he's a Buddhist, he's a communist, he's a socialist, he's a Muslim, conditioned locally by the climate, by the culture, by the food, by the clothes, by the manner, and so on. There he functions as an individual, but primarily he is a human being. Human being that exists in America, in Russia, in China, in India, who are in travail, who are in deep sorrow. And in understanding the larger, that is the human, then we shall be able to understand the individual. But the understanding of the individual will not necessarily bring about comprehension of the human. So what we are concerned is with the mutation of the human mind. Because the mind is capable of extraordinary things. And we are only using a very small part, which has become the individual, which has become the traditional, the conditioned. And in that limited, conditioned state we function, forgetting the vast capacity of the mind. So, one has to understand this fundamental difference between the human and the individual. And when we are concerned with the greater, then the lesser will be understood. The individual in society and the human as a total entity. We were saying the other day that there are fundamentally only two problems for man, for the human: freedom and love. Freedom implies order. Order, social order, is now chaotic, contradictory. It is disorder, as one observes it. As you observe the society in which you live, what you call order is essentially disorder, because there is violence. Each human being is in competition with each other. There is brutality. There is competition to destroy the other, and so on, which is essentially disorder. War, hate, ambition is disorder. And we accept this disorder as order, don't we? We accept this morality, the social morality, as orderly. But it's actually, when you observe it very closely, it is disorder. I think that's fairly clear, unless one is totally blind by tradition, by one's own convenience, and so on. Now, to bring about, to be free from this disorder is order. Please follow this little bit. To be free from disorder, which is the social order, is to be free from the disorder is to be actually in order. So one cannot seek order. Order is a living thing. It is changing, it's moving, it's vital, creative. It isn't just functioning within a pattern established by society, by culture. That society, that culture has produced great disorder, great misery, conflict. And this conflict, this confusion, however supposedly moral, is immoral, is disorder. Now, if the mind can understand this disorder and free itself from this disorder, then naturally there will be order. Then the mind won't seek a pattern of order. I don't know if I'm making myself clear on this point. This is really very important to understand. Through negation of what is disorder, there is order. But if you pursue order positively, then you will have disorder. So the negation of that which is not order, which we consider the positive, When you negate it completely, then out of that negation is the positive order, which is living. That is, when the mind understands very clearly that hate is not love, or jealousy is not love, and when you deny completely jealousy, envy, then you may come upon what is love. But you cannot cultivate love. But you can deny that which is not. So, out of denial of that which is not true comes what is true. And what is true, what is order, cannot be pre-established. If you do, then you are merely suppressing disorder which will burst again at another time. Look, all the tyrannies, the dictatorships, the Russian or the Chinese or the Hitlerian, Mussolini and so on, they said this is order. This is the way you must think, act, function. And Stalin and others have liquidated millions and millions, literally millions, in order to bring about order, what they considered order, which is breeding disorder. Obviously, because there is the demand for freedom. There is the demand that the mind shall be free, not be suppressed, not be ordered about by a dictator. So, in the understanding of what is disorder, which is our life, not an idea of disorder. There is a difference between that. In understanding our life, which is disorder, then out of that understanding comes order. Order is not an idea. There is no concept about order. As we said, order is virtue. And one cannot have a pre-concept of virtue, what virtue is. Please do follow this little bit. Because as you cannot possibly cultivate humility, cultivate it, that is, follow a certain system, method. And if you do, then it's not humility. And so, as order cannot be cultivated, that is, an ideology, and live according to that an ideology, is to bring about conflict. And conflict essentially is disorder. Do follow this. Conflict within or without is disorder. So the question is, is it possible to understand this whole structure of disorder without creating its opposite. And when you create the opposite, it breeds disorder. So can you understand disorder without conflict? Because the moment there is conflict, there is the indication of its opposite, that you must be orderly. Order is virtue. And when these two opposites exist, there is conflict. So can the mind, without creating the opposite, understand disorder without conflict? This is not an intellectual feat. This is not something of a puzzle. But that is essentially our problem. We live in a state of disorder, both in the house, actually in your own houses, the disorder, the confusion, the mess, the dirt, the squalor, and which is projected outwardly. In your office, in your way of thinking, walking, sitting, spitting, everything that goes on. Now, to be aware of that, and whether that awareness will bring about a radical revolution. Now, freedom is not from something. Please do, we are going through rather difficult things to explain, and explanation is never the actual thing. And we unfortunately think by explaining we understand something. We don't. Explanation is one thing and actuality is another. The word tree, the word is not the tree. But we confuse the word with the tree. Right? So, freedom, that is, what we call freedom is freedom from something. Freedom from anger, freedom from violence, freedom from this utter despair. And when you are free from something, are you actually free? Please do go into it in yourselves, observe it. Or is freedom something entirely different and not from something? Being free from something is a reaction. And the reaction can go on repeating itself indefinitely. But freedom, of which we are talking about, is entirely different. The sense of being completely free, not from anything. And it is this quality of awareness of what is implied in being free from something, if being aware of that, the whole structure of that, will naturally bring about a freedom which is not a reaction. I don't understand this. Is this all getting rather too complicated? Yes? we have to examine what we mean by awareness. The word. Don't translate it into Sanskrit. Don't say, I must practice it. Just try to understand what that word means, the English word, and what is implied, the structure and the nature of that word. As you sit here, as we sit here, we are aware, conscious, see the various colors of the tent. You observe it. You see the various colors. And as you see it, you have your response, your reactions to those colors of like or dislike. That is the simple beginning of awareness, of being aware of what you see. Most of us don't see at all. We pass a tree every day of our life and never stop to look at it. We see the squalor on the road and we do nothing about it. So we are not observant outwardly of the trees, of the birds, of the sky, of the clouds, the beauty of a sunset, the curve of a hill, the smile on a face. We are not aware of it at all, outwardly. But it becomes much more difficult to be aware inwardly of what actually is going on. There, outwardly, it doesn't very much matter. But inwardly it matters very much. Because the moment you are aware of yourself, your thoughts, your feelings, your confusion, then you get agitated. You are anxious. You want to change it. But first, what is important is just to observe without any reaction. Suppose I'm angry. I observe it. I don't condemn it. I don't say it is right or wrong. I want to understand it. And to understand anything, doesn't matter what it is, there must be neither condemnation nor justification. And to understand something, mind must be completely quiet. If I want to understand you, I mustn't have any prejudice about you. I mustn't say I like or dislike your face, your color, your race, your language, the way you talk, the way you move. I must just observe you. And to observe very clearly, the mind must be quiet. Not how to make the mind quiet, which becomes too absurd. Because the mind cannot be made quiet. If you do, there are duality in it. There is the man who says, I must make the mind quiet, and there is the actuality of the mind which wanders all over the place. There is a conflict. Whereas, if one wants to understand oneself, the mind has to be quiet, to look. And you cannot look if you condemn, if you justify, if you falsify, if you are not honest. And as most of us are trained to be dishonest, never to look at things directly. It becomes extraordinarily difficult for people who have not actually looked, observed a tree, a cloud, the beauty of light on the water. So, awareness is this quality of mind which observes without any justification or condemnation, approval or disapproval, like or dislike, merely observes. And it is rather difficult when emotionally you are stirred up. When your security, when your family, when your opinions, judgments, your beliefs are shaken. And they're going to be shaken. Then in life there is nothing whatsoever secure. Everything is in change. And we refuse to accept this change. And hence the battle in ourselves. So when you observe very quietly yourself and the world about you, then out of this observation comes freedom. Not the freedom from something. Is this fairly clear? Now, we're going to examine this question of fear. To observe it. Not the idea of fear. In there are two things involved in this. There is the idea of fear and actual fear. With most of us, fear is the idea, not the actual fact. Now, can I look at fear without the idea of fear? Without the word, with its associations related to fear? We'll go slowly in this. Most of us are afraid of the dark, of what people say, of losing a job, of not achieving, not becoming successful, fear of their wife or their husband, and so on, so on. There are dozens of fears. Fear of death, fear of living, fear of... we are a mass of fear. Fear doesn't exist by itself. It exists in relation to something. Now, we are going to examine fear without bringing its opposite. Courage, bravery, and so on. Actually looking at fear and not escaping from it. Because most of us do escape. Because we don't know how to tackle it, how to come to grips with it. So we take to drink, we do all kinds of things. Go to temples, churches, mosques. It's all an escape from the actual fact that one is afraid. So, to understand fear, there must be no escape. Right? Not verbally. Actually no escape. And can I look at fear? Fear of death. Fear of losing my job. Fear of not accomplishing, not becoming successful, not being bright or whatever it is. Can you actually look at it? That is, to become aware of it without any choice, right? To look at it. Now, it is not possible to look at it if you have an idea about fear. Look, when you are hungry, you don't compare hunger with yesterday's hunger. Yesterday's hunger is an idea, is a memory. That idea or that memory doesn't make you hungry now. You are hungry actually now, not the idea or the memory of hunger of yesterday. Right? So, as hunger is immediate, it is not provoked by a memory. So, can you look at fear which is not the result of a memory? This is please go slowly, it's a very complex problem, this. That is, does the idea and the association with a particular incident create fear, or is fear independent of association? You know, what is important in this is to find out how you are listening. What is actually taking place as you listen? Are you merely hearing words, and those words create a certain memory, arouse certain feelings? Or are you actually listening to the words and therefore listening to the actual fact of your own fear? I don't know if you're following all this. I'm afraid I'm losing you. Look, sir, one is afraid of death. I'm taking that as an example. I'm not going to the whole question of death now, this evening. One is afraid of death, or one is afraid of being, whatever it is, one is afraid of. I'm taking that as an example of death. Now, is the fear caused by the image you have in your mind about death? The memory of so many deaths that you have seen, and be associating with those incidents yourself, and therefore being afraid. So which means the image is creating fear, right? Or are you actually afraid of coming to an end? Not the image creating the end. Is the word death causing you fear, the word, or the actual ending? Right? If the word is causing fear, then it's not fear at all. Do listen to this very carefully. If you are afraid because of a memory, I was ill 2 years ago, and the memory of that pain, of that illness, sickness remains. And that memory now functioning says, be careful, don't get ill. And that memory creates fear. So the memory with its associations is bringing about fear. Which is not fear at all, because I am not afraid actually. I am very good health. But the mind with its memories through time is creating fear. Right? So thought, please follow this, thought which is always the old, because thought is the response of memory, and memory is always old. There is nothing new in thought. That thought creates in time the feeling that you are afraid, which is not an actual fact. The actual fact is you are well. But the thought which has experienced, or there is the experience which has remained in the mind as memory, from that arises the thought, be careful, don't fall ill. And therefore one is afraid. So thought engenders fear. Right? That's one kind of fear. Or is there fear at all except apart from that? Or you get... Is fear the result of thought? And if it is, there is no other form of fear. I don't know if you're meeting this point. I am afraid of death. That is something that's going to happen tomorrow or day after tomorrow in time. There is a distance from actuality and to what will be. Now, thought has experienced this state by observing deaths. Says, I am going to die. Thought creates the fear of death. And if it doesn't, is there fear at all? I wonder if you're meeting with this. So is fear the result of thought? So, thought being old, fear is always old. Please follow this carefully. Isn't it? Thought is old. There is no new thought. If it is a new thought, you cannot recognize. If you recognize it, it's already the old. So what we are afraid of is the repetition of the old. The thought projecting into the future of what has been. So thought is responsible for fear. And this is so, you can see it for yourself. When you are confronted with something immediate, there is no fear. It's only when thought comes in, then there is fear. Right? So, our question is it possible for the mind to live so completely in the present? Please, this remind, so totally in the present, there is neither the past nor the future. And it is only such a mind that has no fear. But to understand this, you have to understand the structure of thought, memory, time. And without understanding it, understanding not intellectually, not verbally, but actually with your heart, with your mind, with your guts, then there is freedom, total freedom from freedom. Not from fear, there is total freedom. Then the mind can use thought without creating fear. Right? So, freedom from fear is absolutely necessary. Freedom is absolutely necessary. Because if there is no freedom, there is no peace. There is no order. And therefore there is no love. And when there is love, then you can do what you will. Then there is no sin. Then there is no conflict. But to understand freedom and love, one has to understand non-verbally the quality of freedom that comes when disorder is understood. And this disorder is understood when you understand the structure and the nature of thought, not according to the speaker, or according to some psychologist, or according to Shankara, this person or that person, then you are understanding them. You are not understanding yourself. You are understanding yourself according to the Gita. Then that's too silly, too immature. Or the Quran, or whatever your authority is. So, to understand yourself, there must be complete throwing away of all authority. Right? Don't please agree. That agreement is merely verbal. It has no meaning. See why it is important. Because all your authorities, your Gitas, your books, your gurus, your Mahatmas have led you to this terrible state of complete despair, loneliness, misery, confusion. You have followed them, at least you have pretended to follow them. And now you have to take the journey by yourself. There is no authority that's going to lead you. Lead you to a bliss that is not to be found in any book, in any temple. You have to take the journey entirely by yourself. You can't trust anybody. Why should you trust anybody? Why should you trust any authority? Because you say, I am confused. I don't know. You know. So please tell me. Which means what? You are escaping from your own confusion. And to understand your confusion, you cannot look to somebody to help you out of that confusion. That confusion has come into being because of this outward authority. Do look at it, it's so clear. So, there must be this sense of complete abandonment of all authority, which means a great deal of fear, right? Because before you have leaned on people, on your guru, on your book, or your God knows who you lean on. And you put your faith in them. And what has taken place is in your life there is confusion, violence, misery, an untold agony going on in your daily life. So no authority of any kind is going to help you. So, this abandonment of authority brings about not only a sense of complete aloneness, a sense of not being able to depend on any book or any authority. Do you know what it does to you when you do that? Then you travel lightly. Then you do not carry other people's burden and their authority. You are alone to find out. And you must be alone to find out what is true. What other people say what truth is not truth. And it is truth that something beyond all time and space is only possible when when the mind is completely alone. I do not know if you haven't noticed, if you have gone into it deeply enough, that being alone means being innocent. But we are not innocent. We carry the burden of what 1,000 people have said. We have carried the memories of our own misfortunes. To abandon all that totally, both at the conscious as well as the unconscious level, is to be alone. And a mind that is alone is innocent and therefore young. And it's only the young mind, not in time, not in age, young mind, innocent, alive mind. It's only such a mind can see that which is true and that which is not measurable by words. And this can only come about naturally, not through your wishing, wanting, longing, all that is so immature, so childish. This can only come about when we understand the nature of freedom. A mind that is burdened with authority, with quotations, with knowledge of what has been, except technologically. Such a mind is burdened with fear. So, what is important is the understanding and the structure of thought. Not what other people say, what you think and why you think. If you are a Sikh or a Hindu, a Muslim or a communist or whatever it is, why do you think those things? Because you've been told, you've been brought up in a certain culture, condition, and you keep on repeating like a gramophone record. And that's not freedom. And because you are not free, you're creating disorder. Do please see this. See it passionately, with great intensity, and you will be out of it. Because you are conditioned as a Hindu and all the sects in Hinduism, Buddhism, and Christianity, whatever it is. You are conditioned, that conditioning is creating disorder. And in that limited conditioning, you can never find order. It's only order there is order only when you have observed the structure and the nature of disorder in yourself. Because yourself are the result of 1,000 yesterdays, 1,000 influences, 1,000 authorities, of newspapers, radio, of your wife, of your husband, the culture you live in. And as long as you live in that, there must be increasing disorder and therefore increasing misery. Can we ask questions about what we have talked this evening? What is your opinion about what ideals human beings should have? Is that it? Yes. Look, I have no opinions. That's the most unintelligent thing to say. What is your opinion about something? Why do we have opinions at all? Aren't they a waste of time to have opinions of what some people do or don't do or say or don't say? So, the question is, if we can put away dialectical opinions altogether and searching through opinions truth which cannot be found through opinions, then we are confronted with the problem of human beings. Must human beings have ideals? Right? Yes. Why should they have ideals? You have your ideals, haven't you? All of you, I'm sure of it. That you must be good, that you must be noble, that you must not be violent, that you must be charitable, that you must be kind, love, that you must be this and that. Are you actually? Right? You have these ideals galore by the thousand. But actually are you? What matters is what you are, not what your ideals are. What your actually daily life is. Your daily life is violence, brutal. And what's the good of having an ideal of non-violence? That's a cheap escape. What matters is to face what you are. When you have an ideal, it is the opposite of what you are. And therefore you have conflict. You have waste of energy. It's an escape. It's a brutal thing to have ideals. See the fact, not what I said. What the speaker says is totally unimportant. What is important to see the fact. And the fact is, in your daily life you are violent, ambitious, greedy. Face that. And you can only face it if you have energy. And you waste energy through ideals. And all ideals, whether it is the ideals of Buddhism or communism or anything, any ideals is totally idiotic. Because they do not deal with the fact of what you actually are. And man has lived on ideals which are words. Words do not feed your mind or heart. They are just ashes. What is important is to face the fact. Face the fact that you are angry, envious, brutal, with an occasional flash of affection, that you are sexual, sensual. I don't say it's right or wrong, just look at it.
How can you just say we are human being and individual? What I mean, how to define a human being?
The gentleman asks, how do you define human being and the individual? Do we need definition to find out what a human being is? The dictionary will give you the definition. Is that going to explain, reveal actually what you are as a human being? So the danger is being caught in explanations and definitions. You are a human being, sir, with all the troubles, with all the misery, with the agony of life, the conflict, as they are in America, Russia, China, everywhere. You are human beings, without any nationality, but the nationality, the culture, the climate, that is what conditions which becomes the human, which becomes the individual. The individual is always limited. But when we understand the human nature, the human being which you are, then you can, in that understanding, the individual can be understood and it has its own right place.
How can the conditioned mind examine unconditioned?
How can a conditioned mind examine the unconditioned? Is that right, sir? How can the conditioned mind understand the unconditioned? It cannot, right? What it can understand is its own conditioning, not the unconditioned. The unconditioned is an idea, is a utopia, is an ideology that you must be unconditioned. But the fact is, you are conditioned. Can you be aware of it? Can you be aware that you function, think, feel as a Sikh, as a Muslim, as a Hindu, and so on? To be aware of it. Which is to come directly into contact with it. And if you come directly into contact with it, then you will never be a Sikh or a Hindu You throw away all that rubbish. Because that's what is dividing human beings. Nationalities, frontiers, religions, ideologies. You have your ideology and another has his ideology. And therefore you're in conflict. So throw away all that. Make a clean sweep of all that. That means to live anew. Live a life which you have never lived before. A life of total freedom. And it is only such a mind, such a life that can come upon this extraordinary thing called truth. That truth has no word, it has no image. It is not to be found in any book, in any temple, in any church. You all know this, but you all go back to your old vomit. So this demands an earnest life. This demands clarity on your part, not on the part of the speaker. It's your life. In your life, you have to bring about this total revolution. Yes, sir.
Sir, we reach a state by this, as you said, by this observation or understanding, by negation, but without jumping to the opposite or positive. We reach a state of simple awareness or freedom. Freedom not from, but freedom. When we reach that state, then there is no thought. Why? Yes, sir. Now, in this state, as we continue, and as you would finally grant, that everyone would like to continue because this is the greatest and peace-giving state. Now, nobody likes to be without peace. When one reaches the state of freedom, awareness, there is complete peace. And one doesn't like to be away from it or being shaken. But in our existence, daily existence, activities, then with this state, without thought, without idea, can we even earn our daily bread? Or should we even...
Sir, I understand your question, sir. You're saying our daily life is one thing, and the ideology of what you're talking about, freedom, is another. I have no ideology, as I told you. I'm just pointing out what actually is taking place in your daily life. Your daily life is what it is. You can forget peace, thought, a state of mind in which there is no thought and all that. Forget it. That is no important whatsoever. Throw it overboard. Drown it. Wipe it away. But what is real is your daily life. The way you work in your office, the way you talk to your servant if you have a servant, the way you treat your wife, your husband, your children, your neighbor. And if you don't know what you are doing, then you are totally blind, and blind people have no right whatsoever to have ideals. That's a tremendous escape from their blindness. So, sir, you know, we can multiply words, but words do not bring about love. I can talk endlessly about being generous, kind, but you will not be generous or kind because you listen to me. You will be kind and generous and full of delight when you have understood the structure and the nature of yourself. And to understand yourself, there is no need for another. You have to just to look. Do you approve of group formations around what we have talked about, and do you think it is worthwhile? Is that the question, sir? That's it. Do whatever you want to do. If you want to form a group, form it. If you don't form it. If you want to understand yourself through a group, form a group. And if you say, well, that will not help me to understand myself, to live a different kind of life, then don't join a group. You are responsible for yourself and for nobody else. It's your life. And you have to stand completely alone. Never asking, never begging, never seeking truth. Because truth doesn't come to the seeker. You cannot invite it. It's like the wind, like the breezes that come if you leave the windows open. You can't invite the breeze. And if you are lucky, it might come. And I hope you are lucky.